The dust had not yet settled from the stagecoach wheels when Maylin Zal understood that she had been left behind. She stood in the middle of Prosperity, Wyoming territory, her trunk at her feet, and her wedding paper clutched so tight in her hand that the ink had begun to smear against her damp palm. The paper named a man called Edmund Faust, a mill owner who had written her 3 letters across 2 years, letters that promised a house with a stove and a garden with room enough for cabbages. She had crossed an ocean and half a continent believing those letters. Now the driver was already climbing back onto his box, and the dust was already rising again, and there was no Edmund Faust anywhere on the boardwalk. "You looking for somebody, miss?" A woman in an apron had stepped out from the mercantile, wiping flour from her hands onto her skirt. "Edmund Faust," Maylin said. Her English was careful, practiced across 2 years of letters, but it still came out stiffer than she wanted. "He said he would meet the coach." The woman's face did something complicated. Pity mostly, with an edge of something harder underneath. "Edmund Faust took the morning train to Cheyenne 3 days ago. Married a widow from Laramie who owns 400 acres outright." She said it plainly, the way a person delivers weather. "I am sorry, miss. Truly." Maylin did not sit down in the street, though her legs wanted to. She had not survived a Pacific crossing and a continent of rail lines to fold in the dirt in front of strangers. She picked up her trunk instead, both hands under the rope handle, and dragged it toward the shade of the boardwalk, because a woman thinking clearly needed shade before she needed anything else. By noon she understood the shape of her situation. She had $11 sewn into her hem, a trunk of clothes and cookware, and a letter of introduction to a man who did not want her. The town of Prosperity had a hotel, but the hotel wanted 75 cents a night, and $11 did not last long against that arithmetic. She had a return option, technically. The agency who arranged the marriage would, for a fee she could not afford, arrange her passage back to San Francisco, where she had no family left and no prospects better than the ones that had failed her here. But therefore she did the only thing that made sense to a woman raised in a kitchen. She found the man who ran the boarding house kitchen and told him she could cook. He looked at her the way most of Prosperity had looked at her since she stepped off the coach. Her size first, the width of her, the roundness of her face, and then, more slowly, the steadiness in her eyes that did not match the pity everyone kept offering her. "No one marries a fat girl, ma'am," he said. Not cruel about it, just stating a fact the way the mercantile woman had stated Edmund Faust's marriage. "But if you can cook, I can pay you to cook." She worked in his kitchen for 11 days, and on the 12th day she overheard 2 ranch hands complaining that their outfit's cook had quit halfway through a cattle drive and left them eating burned beans for a week. She untied her apron before she had fully decided to, and she walked out onto the street to ask them who ran their ranch. The name they gave her was Everett Calloway. She found him at the livery, checking a gelding shoe with the kind of patience that told her something about the man before he had said a word. He was tall in the way ranchers got tall, weathered at the hands and the neck, with a quiet that was not shyness but conservation. A man who did not waste words because words had never done him much good out here. He straightened when she approached, and she saw him take her in the way everyone had taken her in since Wyoming, the size of her first. But his face did not do the pity thing. It did something more like calculation, the way a man looks at weather before deciding whether to move the cattle. "You the woman Faust left standing in the street," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am the woman who is looking for work, Mr. Calloway." She kept her chin level. "I hear your outfit lost its cook." "We did." He looked at her a long moment, and she watched him do the arithmetic every practical man on the frontier did before he spent money he did not have to spend. Cooking for a cattle drive is not cooking for a boarding house. 16 men, open fire, 3 meals a day, and half the time you're cooking in wind that wants to put your fire out and rain that wants to drown it." "I have cooked in worse," she said, which was not entirely true, but she said it with enough certainty that Everett Calloway's eyebrows moved half an inch, and that was the first small victory of her life in Wyoming. He hired her for the drive. $15 and provisions, paid at the end when the herd reached the railhead in Ogallala. It was more money than she had held in her hand since she left China, and it was also, she understood clearly, a kind of mercy dressed up as a business transaction, because a man like Everett Calloway did not need to hire a stranger off the street when half the cowhands in Prosperity knew someone who could sling beans over a fire. But she did not have time to think too hard about mercy, because the herd moved out 2 mornings later, and Maylin Zhao found herself riding a supply wagon into open country with 16 men who did not yet know what to make of her, 400 head of longhorn cattle, and a summer sky that had not decided yet whether it meant to be kind. The first week taught her the rhythm of it. Up before dawn to get the fire going and the coffee boiled, biscuits in the Dutch oven buried in coals, beans started before the men were even saddled, because a cattle drive stopped for nothing, and a cook who was not ready when the men rolled in for their meal earned herself a reputation fast. She learned to read the wind for her fire the way the hands read it for the herd. She learned which of the men liked their coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe and which ones wanted it weak. She learned Everett Calloway's habits without meaning to, the way he checked the horizon before he checked anything else each morning, the way he ate standing up more often than sitting, the way his voice dropped low and even when a green hand made a mistake that could have gotten someone killed. Never raised, because Everett Calloway was not a man who needed volume to be obeyed. The men were rough with her at first, in the careless way men are rough with anyone new, testing what she would tolerate. A hand named Otis made a comment about her size within her first 3 days that was meant to be heard, that she was built for a wagon seat rather than a saddle, and the men around the fire laughed the way men laugh when they are deciding whether cruelty is permitted. Maylin did not flinch. She set down the pot she was carrying, looked at Otis directly, and said in her careful English, "A wagon seat holds still. A saddle does not. I would rather be built for the thing that does not hold still." Then she went back to her cooking. There was a silence, and then one of the older hands, a man named Dutch, laughed loud enough to startle the horses, and the tenor of the camp shifted after that. Otis did not bother her again. But therefore, she understood something important in that moment, that she would have to earn her place here the same way every person on this drive had earned theirs, through work and through nerve, and that nobody was going to hand her respect the way Edmund Faust had promised her a house with a stove. Everett Calloway had watched the whole exchange from beside his horse and said nothing, but that evening, when she brought him his plate last, the way she brought every man his plate, he held her gaze a beat longer than necessary and said, "You handled that well." It was 4 words. It was the first thing he had said to her that was not business. She did not let herself make more of it than it was, but she noticed that he had noticed. The drive pushed north and east through country that tested everyone. A dry stretch cost them 2 days of hard rationing on water, and Maylin learned to stretch coffee and beans across less liquid than any recipe she knew called for, boiling beans in broth thinned twice over, and serving biscuits she baked smaller so the flour would last. A hand twisted his ankle badly crossing a rocky wash, and she wrapped it tight with strips torn from a flour sack, set him up in the wagon bed, and kept his spirits from souring by making sure his food came to him hot, even when everyone else's had gone lukewarm from the walk across camp. Everett Calloway watched all of this with the same quiet attention he gave the weather and the cattle, cataloging her the way he cataloged everything that mattered to the survival of his outfit. It was on the 11th night, camped along a creek bed with cottonwoods casting long blue shadows in the dusk, that the drive faced its first real crisis. The cattle spooked. Nobody ever knew exactly what set them off, whether it was a rattler in the brush, or lightning flickering silent on a distant ridge, or nothing at all, the kind of nothing that made a herd of 400 longhorns decide as one animal mind to run. The sound of it woke the whole camp at once, a low rolling thunder that was not thunder, and Everett Calloway was on his horse and shouting orders before Maylin had even gotten her boots laced. She knew enough by now to know what a stampede meant. She knew it could kill men, that horses went down in the dark and riders went under hooves, that the difference between a controlled turn and a disaster was measured in seconds and nerve. She could do nothing to help with the cattle themselves, but she could see, in the chaos of men grabbing horses and shouting directions in the dark, that the wagon with the water barrels sat directly in the path the herd was running, and that if the cattle hit the wagon in the dark, the outfit would lose its water for the rest of the drive at minimum, and at worst, someone standing near it would be trampled. She did not think it through as a plan. She grabbed the lantern, lit it fast with hands that shook only a little, and ran toward the wagon, waving the light high and wide, and shouting in a voice she did not know she had, deep and carrying, the kind of voice that came from somewhere below thought. The lead steers, spooked already by noise and dark, shied from the swinging light and the human shape moving fast and loud where they had not expected one, and the break in the herd's line was enough. The riders got around the flank and the gap she had made and began to turn the front of the herd in a wide circle, the old trick of turning a stampede back into itself until it wound down like a spring losing tension. It took the better part of an hour to settle the cattle fully. When it was over and the count came up short by only 6 head, all of them recovered by morning grazing loose a mile out, Everett Calloway rode back into camp and found Maylin still standing near the wagon, breathing hard, the lantern burned down low in her hand. "You could have been killed," he said. It was not gratitude, not exactly, though something moved under it that was close to gratitude's cousin. "The water would have been killed for certain," she said. "I decided the water mattered more than my fear." He looked at her for a long moment in the low lantern light, and something in his weathered face shifted, some private recalculation. "Most men on this drive would have stayed in their bedroll," he said. "You did not." "I am not most men," she said, and something in the dryness of it made the corner of his mouth move, not quite a smile, but its early relative. Word of what she had done traveled through the camp by morning the way things travel on a cattle drive, mouth to mouth over breakfast fires, and the men's regard for her shifted again, deeper this time, past mere tolerance into something like respect. Dutch told her over coffee that Everett Calloway did not say things like that about many hands, let alone a cook 3 weeks into her first drive. Maylin accepted the compliment with a nod and went back to her biscuits, but she carried the words with her the rest of the day, turning them over the way a person turns over a coin they are not sure is real. But the good feeling of the stampede's aftermath did not last, because 2 days later, trouble arrived wearing a different face entirely, and this one did not spook and scatter like cattle. This one had a name and a grudge, and his name was Silas Bragg. Bragg ran cattle on the range adjoining Calloway land, and he had wanted the water rights along Calloway's northern creek for going on 3 years, ever since a dry summer had shown him exactly how much his own herd depended on borrowed water he had no legal claim to. He rode into the drive's camp on the 13th evening with 2 men behind him, all 3 of them armed in the casual, deliberate way that meant the weapons were meant to be seen rather than used, at least for now. "Calloway." Bragg's voice was pleasant, which was, Maylin was learning about this territory, often the most dangerous register a man's voice could take. "Heard you were pushing your herd through the eastern pass. That pass runs along the boundary of land I've got a claim filed on." "You've got no filed claim on that pass, Silas," Everett said, standing slow and even, his hands loose at his sides in a way that told Maylin, who had learned to read him across 2 weeks, that he was more alert than he looked. "I checked the territorial office myself before we left." "Filings can be slow to record." Bragg's smile did not move past his mouth. "Man could find himself in violation of a claim that just hadn't caught up to the paperwork yet. Costly business, disputing a boundary in territorial court. Takes months. Herd like yours can't sit still for months, can it, waiting on a judge?" But, therefore, Maylin understood, standing by her fire with a ladle still in her hand, that this was not really about the pass at all. This was about the water on the other side of it, the northern creek that fed Calloway's home range, and that Bragg meant to squeeze a concession out of Everett by threatening to tie up his drive in a legal fight he could not afford the time to fight. She had seen men like this in the shipping offices of San Francisco, men whose politeness was a kind of leverage, and she recognized the shape of the trap even before Everett's jaw tightened. Everett did not raise his voice. "I'll take my chances with the territorial office, Silas. My filing predates any claim you could have on that pass, and you know it." "Maybe." Bragg's eyes moved, unhurried, across the camp, over the wagon, over the men standing wary near the fire, and landed for just a moment on Maylin. Something in his gaze made her skin go cold in a way the summer evening did not explain. "Fine outfit you've got here, Calloway. Fine cook, too, I hear. Word travels. Woman ran straight at a stampede with a lantern. Braver than half the men I've hired." He said it like a compliment, but it landed like a threat, a reminder that he had eyes on this camp, that nothing here was private from him. "Shame if something happened to slow this drive down. Cattle get sick on bad water sometimes. Wagons lose wheels on rough trail. Lots can go wrong out here, and nobody to answer for it but bad luck." The threat was plain enough that even the newest hand understood it, and Maylin watched the men's hands drift unconsciously closer to where their own weapons hung. Everett's voice went very quiet. The quiet that she had learned by now meant he was closest to anger. "You're threatening my outfit in front of 16 witnesses, Silas." "I'm making conversation." Bragg's smile widened, and he touched his hat brim in a gesture that mocked courtesy more than it offered it. "Think on the pass, Calloway. I'll be around." He turned his horse and rode out with his 2 men, unhurried, letting the threat sit in the camp like smoke that would not clear. That night, once the camp had settled and the men had gone quiet in their bedrolls, Everett found Maylin still awake near the banked fire, mending a torn strap on the wagon's harness by lantern light because her hands needed something to do. He sat down across the low coals from her without asking, which by now she understood was as close as he came to asking. "He looked at you tonight," Everett said. "I did not like the way he looked at you." "I did not like it either," she admitted. She kept her eyes on her mending. In San Francisco there were men like him, men whose smile is the most dangerous part of their face. Everett was quiet a moment, turning something over. "My father built this outfit from nothing," he said finally, and she looked up, surprised, because he had not offered her a piece of his history before now. "Died 4 years back. Left me the ranch and a debt I've been 3 years paying down. Bragg knows the debt is not fully cleared. He is betting I cannot afford a legal fight while I am still owing on the mortgage." His jaw worked. He is not entirely wrong to bet that way. "But you will not give him the pass," she said. It was not a question. "No." He looked at her across the low fire, and something in his face had gone unguarded in a way she had not seen from him before. I have never given ground to a man who threatens instead of asks. My father taught me that. A ranch is not just land. It is the word you keep about the land. She thought of Edmund Faust, who had promised her a house and a garden and had not even stayed long enough to see her face, who had broken his word the moment a better offer arrived. She thought of the difference between a man who kept his word under pressure and a man who abandoned it the second it became inconvenient. I understand the value of a kept word, she said quietly. I crossed an ocean because of a broken one. Everett looked at her for a long moment in the lantern light, and something passed between them that neither of them named, but both of them felt. A recognition. The particular kind that grows between two people who have each been underestimated and have each decided, separately, not to let that underestimation define them. Faust was a fool, he said finally. I have thought so since I heard how he left you standing in the street. A man does not deserve a woman who runs at a stampede to save his water barrels. Mei Lin felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the fire. You did not know me when you heard that story. I know enough now, he said, and the quiet directness of it sat between them longer than either seemed ready to break. Nothing more was said that night, but the drive changed after that, or perhaps it was only that Mei Lin began to notice what had perhaps been building for 2 weeks already. The way Everett Calloway found reasons to walk near her fire at the end of each day. The way he had begun asking her opinion on small decisions that were not strictly a cook's business. The way the men had started to treat her not merely as staff, but as somebody whose word carried weight in the outfit. Bragg did not strike again immediately, and for 4 days the drive pushed forward under a tension that never quite broke, everyone watching the tree lines and the ridges for riders who did not come. Then, on the 17th night, with the herd bedded near a shallow ford and the camp settling into its evening rhythm, one of Bragg's men rode close enough under cover of dusk to fire 2 shots into the air above the herd. Close enough to spook, but not to stampede outright. Close enough to prove a point. The point was made. Cattle bawled and shifted, and 2 riders had to work half the night keeping them settled. And in the confusion, someone cut loose 3 of the wagon's mules, driving them off into the dark where it took until near dawn to recover them. It was, Mei Lin understood clearly, a warning shaped like an accident, deniable, the kind of thing Bragg could claim was drifters or wolves or bad luck if anyone pressed him on it. But everyone in camp knew what it was. Everett came to breakfast that morning with a look on his face that Mei Lin had not seen from him before, something harder than his usual quiet, and she understood that a decision had been made in him sometime in the dark hours. I am riding to Prosperity, he told the assembled hands, filing a formal complaint with the territorial marshal and getting my paperwork on the pass certified beyond any argument Bragg can raise. Dutch, you have the drive while I'm gone. 2 days there, 2 days back if the weather holds. You should not go alone, Mei Lin said before she had fully decided to speak. Every man at the fire looked at her, and she did not flinch from it. Bragg has already shown he is willing to act while pretending he is not. A man riding alone to town is an easier target than an outfit of 16. Everett considered this, and something in his face suggested he had already thought the same thing and simply had not liked admitting he needed the company. I cannot spare a hand from the drive, and Dutch needs every man he has got with Bragg circling. Then take me, Mei Lin said. The words surprised her even as she spoke them, but once said, she did not want to take them back. I am not a hand you would lose from the herd, and I know how to keep quiet and keep watch. I did it on the ship crossing when there were men aboard I did not trust. He looked at her a long moment, weighing it the way he weighed everything, and then he nodded once, sharp, decided. "Pack light. We ride within the hour." The 2 days' ride to Prosperity were unlike anything in Maylin's life so far. Long stretches of open country with only Everett's steady presence beside her, conversation coming slow and then, unexpectedly, easily, about small things at first, the names of the wildflowers scattered gold and purple across the summer range, the particular stubbornness of the gelding he rode, and then, as the miles passed, about larger things. He told her about his father, about the winter that had nearly broken the ranch before he inherited it, about the loneliness of running an outfit that size with no one at the house waiting when the work was done. She told him about her mother's kitchen in San Francisco, about the years of letters with Edmund Faust that she now understood had been building a house of promises with no foundation under it, about the particular terror and freedom of arriving somewhere with nothing left to lose. "He never once asked what you looked like," Everett said at one point, riding close enough that their stirrups nearly touched. In the letters. "He asked what I could cook," she said. "I did not think much of it at the time. I think a great deal of it now." "I am glad he never asked," Everett said, quiet, looking ahead at the trail rather than at her, which somehow made the words land harder than if he had looked her in the eye to say them. A man who marries for a face he has not seen is marrying an idea. "I would rather marry a woman I have watched run at a stampede with a lantern." The word marry sat between them on the trail for a long stretch of silence, neither of them taking it back, neither of them pressing it further, and Maylin found that her heart was beating harder than the pace of her horse accounted for. They reached Prosperity on the second evening, and Everett went directly to the territorial marshal's office to file his complaint and have his boundary paperwork certified and copied, a process that took the better part of the next morning, filled with the tedious, necessary business of deeds and witness signatures and a marshal named Foss, who listened to the account of Bragg's night riders with a grim, unsurprised expression that suggested this was not the first complaint filed against Silas Bragg's methods. "I can't arrest a man for shooting in the air near his own range boundary," Marshal Foss said, leaning back in his chair. "But I can put your certified filing on record in a way that leaves no room for argument, and I can send word to Bragg directly that further incidents near your herd will draw federal attention to his operation. That tends to cool a man's temper faster than a fistfight would." It was not the dramatic justice a person might wish for, but it was, Everett said afterward, exactly the kind of quiet, procedural justice that actually worked on the frontier, the kind that closed a door permanently rather than merely for a season. Bragg was a man who thrived on ambiguity and deniability, and a certified filing witnessed by a territorial marshal left him none. That evening, with the business of the day concluded and the ride back to the drive waiting for morning, Everett and Maylin found themselves sharing a supper at the same boarding house kitchen where she had worked her first 11 days in Wyoming. The cook there, the same man who had first told her that no one married a fat girl, but he would gladly pay one to cook, watched the two of them with open curiosity across the room. "You did more on this drive than cook, Maylin," Everett said, once their plates sat mostly empty between them. "You saved the water barrels. You saw through Bragg before I fully admitted to myself what he was doing. You rode 2 days into open country without complaint to help me file paperwork that was not your business to help with." He set down his fork, and his hands, weathered and calloused and steady, folded together on the table in a way that told her he had decided to say something he had been building toward for some time. "I do not have smooth words, Maylin. I am not a man who writes letters like Faust wrote you, full of promises he never meant to keep. But I know what I have seen in 3 weeks. And what I have seen is a woman I would be glad to build a life beside, if she would have me. Maylin sat very still, the boarding house noise fading around her into something distant and unimportant. She thought of Edmund Faust's careful, empty letters, and she thought of Everett Calloway's 4 words in a lantern-lit camp. You handled that well. And the way those 4 words had meant more to her than 2 years of Faust's promises ever had. You were asking me to marry you, Mr. Calloway, she said, and her voice, careful and practiced across 2 years of English lessons, did not shake, though something in her chest had gone entirely unmoored. I am, he said. I know I am not offering you a house with a garden already planted, the way Faust's letters did. I am offering you a ranch that is still paying off its debts, and an outfit of 16 men who already think the world of you, and a man who would rather have your honesty than any woman's beauty. No one marries a fat girl, she said quietly, the words she had said to the boarding house cook on her first day in prosperity, the sentence that had followed her since. That is what I told your cook friend there when I first arrived. It was what I believed after Faust. Faust was wrong about a great many things, Everett said, steady, his eyes not leaving hers. That was chief among them. She looked at him a long moment across the plain wooden table, at the weathered honesty of his face, at the hands that had built and mended and steadied an entire outfit through drought and stampede and threat, and she understood that this offer, plain and unpolished as it was worth more than every careful letter Edmund Faust had ever sent her. Yes, she said, I will marry you, Everett Calloway. They rode back to the drive together the next morning as an engaged pair, and word moved through the outfit fast, the way it always did, and Dutch declared over the evening fire that he had known it was coming since the night of the stampede, and even Otis, chastened weeks ago, offered his congratulations with something like genuine warmth. The herd reached the railhead at Ogallala 9 days later, 400 head delivered whole, the drive a success by any measure the cattle business used to measure success, and Everett paid Maylin her $15 in front of the assembled outfit with a formality that made the men laugh, because everyone present understood that $15 was no longer the actual currency of what had passed between them. 3 months later, in the last golden days of summer cooling toward autumn, Everett Calloway and Maylin Zhao were married in prosperity by the circuit preacher in a ceremony small enough to fit the boarding house dining room, with Dutch standing witness and the boarding house cook, the man who had first hired her and first spoken the sentence that still echoed sometimes in her memory, baking the wedding cake himself as a gift, refusing payment, saying only that he was glad to be wrong about something for once in his life. The ranch house, when Maylin walked into it as its mistress for the first time, had a stove exactly the size she had once imagined in Faust's letters, though this one had been earned rather than promised, paid for in ways no letter could have measured. Behind the house, Everett had already turned a stretch of ground for a garden, the soil dark and ready, waiting on her hands to decide what grew there. Bragg's threat, in the end, dissolved the way such threats often did once their deniability was stripped away by a certified filing and a marshal's warning. He kept to his own range after that, and within 2 years had sold his outfit entirely and moved on to territory less inclined to remember his methods. And Calloway land kept its water and its boundary and its peace. Maylin ran that kitchen for the next 30 years of her life, and the outfit's hands, and later the hands who worked for the son of the outfit's foreman, spoke of her cooking the way men speak of a thing that had become legend through repetition and truth in equal measure. But it was never only the cooking that people remembered when they told the story of the Callaway Ranch. It was the woman who had once stood alone in the dust of a stagecoach stop, with nothing but a trunk and a broken promise, and who had walked into a cattle camp, and through nothing but nerve and competence and an honest heart, built herself a life worth every mile she had crossed to find it. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.